Welcome to this edition of Real World Employment Law, where we discuss real-world issues impacting companies and executives. I'm Declan Leonard. I'm managing partner here at Berenzweig Leonard, and I also head up the firm's employment law section.
And I'm Seth Berenzweig, and I'm also a partner at Berenzweig Leonard. We're here in our beautiful BL Media Studios in downtown Tysons, Virginia, here on a lovely day. And we're here to talk about
what else?
We're here to talk about trying to sort out the recent legal mess of the vaccination mandate and how companies are going to try to figure out what's going on. And what we're going to do in a few minutes is we're going to take a complete national mess and we're going to boil it down to something that's just going to be a piece of cake, right, Declan?
Absolutely, Seth. I hope that's what we're going to do today. And I mean, we were just in the studio just a couple of weeks ago talking about, again, the vaccination mandates. It almost looks like we're like one-trick ponies here. But the reason why we're back in the studio today is because this week there were a number of important developments that happened that impact, how companies are to respond to these vax mandates.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that the world of business needs is some clarity. I mean, just as the stock market needs some clarity, which since it's all red today, looks like it doesn't feel very good. There are a number of business executives and CEOs that aren't feeling very good either because they're feeling a lot of red, they're feeling a lot of pain. There are a number of things that are happening, a lot of potential inconsistency. So let's see if we can set the table straight and just kind of cut to the chase on what's going on and how does it affect companies. So Declan, let me see if we can set the table this way. The way I interpret the best way to start this analysis is that I believe that there's two main channels of cases that are going on in the United States today, and a third one that's kind of off to the side but still is relevant to keep in the back of your mind. The two main channels or buckets of cases that are going on today regarding the vaccine mandate and whether it stands or it doesn't stand is the private employer 100 plus employees bucket of companies in the United States and the federal government contractors bucket of employers in the United States. Is that a fair statement? And how are they doing as far as this recent onslaught of cases is going?
No, absolutely. And the one that got the initial attention was the first one you talked about, which is private companies, not federal contractors, but private companies that have 100 or more employees.
In the commercial space.
In the commercial space, exactly. Right. And that was the one that a couple of weeks ago, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, there's these federal circuits that are right below the United States Supreme Court. So this was an important decision. They came in and they basically said, we are issuing an injunction against enforcement of that. They basically said that OSHA overstepped its bounds in issuing this vax mandate to employers. And it's not, you and I talked about this in our last podcast, it's not truly a vaccination mandate because it does have an option for optional testing and mask wearing and stuff like that.
I call it mandate light because you don't have to get vaccinated. You can either get vaccinated or weekly testing.
That's exactly right. So that one is currently not being implemented. So the court enjoined it. It issued an injunction. It basically said, whoa, stop. You're not going to enforce this. So right now, OSHA has basically stood down on this and said, okay, companies that don't, not federal contractors, but companies that have 100 plus employees, you don't have to implement this right now until it winds its way through the court.
Right. The OSHA is basically saying, even though the Fifth Circuit said we're only going to apply it here in the South, OSHA here in Washington said, you know what, we're going to step it back. We're not going to enforce it until the legal clouds clear because I think everybody knows that this, along with a few other things we'll talk about, it's probably headed pretty quickly to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, and so what happened is they actually had a lottery because there was a number of cases going on all across the country. They actually had a lottery where they decided what's the appellate court that's going to ultimately issue the decision. Even though the Fifth Circuit issued the initial injunction.
We're still in the channel with regard to the private commercial companies.
100 plus employees.
Okay,
yes, that's exactly right. And so now the Sixth Circuit, which is right next to the Fifth Circuit, has won that lottery. And so now all eyes are on the Sixth Circuit about what they're going to do.
Because all the cases, including the one from the Fifth Circuit, is now getting swept up into the Sixth Circuit, and they are saying, okay, we're going to give you the true national final deal on what the ruling is as to the private commercial employees.
That's right. And it's critical to know, though, that as it does wind its way up now through the Sixth Circuit, when they make their decision, OSHA is not implementing or enforcing this Vax Light mandate that we talk about.
Right.
So right now, if you are a company out there with 100+ employees, like, it doesn't mean you shouldn't be taking steps to ascertain the nature of, how many employees are vaccinated or not vaccinated. But that is not something that you have to comply with at this time. Right. One of the things, Seth, that I think is interesting is, things don't move necessarily through the courts at lightning speed. We see that all the time in some of our cases. So if the Sixth Circuit is inclined if the Sixth Circuit does not like this vax mandate,
and we suspect that's going to be the case,
we do,
because the Fifth and Sixth Circuits are very conservative.
They are very conservative. What prevents them from slow rolling their whole review process? Let it take a couple of months. That's how long cases take forever. That's how long it takes. In which case, by slow rolling it, they are in essence sort of killing this mandate anyways.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's a death by 1,000 cuts, because if they just hold on to it, then that's true. The problem is that then that takes the uncertainty and it just kind of magnifies the uncertainty.
It's horrible for employees.
And then what happens for companies as well is that it really screws everybody, because companies need certainty. CEOs, business managers, and employees, everybody deserves to know, okay, so what's the answer? Tell me what's going on. Hopefully, and what I would predict, although time will tell, is that the Sixth Circuit will be relatively quick. They are setting up a briefing schedule. All the cases throughout the United States that were attacking this thing got swept in, and hopefully, shortly after the new year, at some point within the first quarter of next year, it's going to bubble up to the United States Supreme Court, which is definitely where it's going to end up pretty shortly.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I guess there's differing minds on that about how quickly it will get to the United States Supreme Court.
Right.
So if you say the first part of next year, I don't know. It could be the second quarter of next year, and by then, how does this great
reopen?
And the question is for companies who are trying to do what we sometimes call the great reopening, bringing people, whether it's hybrid model or whatever, this is impacting that, because it's kind of hard to plan when you're not sure what policy you have.
And this was surprising to many, including me, because this was mandate light. This wasn't get vaccinated. This was get vaccinated unless you would prefer not to, in which case you can get tested and it's cool. The court still came down and said no. So that's one channel of cases. Okay, bucket number 2, federal government contractors. What's the deal on that?
Okay, so for federal government contractors, the government had issued a mandate. This was a true vaccination mandate, basically saying if you are a company, a private company,
regardless of size,
if you do work with the federal government, you have to get your employees vaccinated. There was deadlines.
No
it was
exceptions.
extended to get the last vaccination by January 4th, and then that would kick in full vaccination by January 18th.
Right.
And that applied again to across the country to all federal contractors.
And that seems simple. But then what happened?
Well, ironically, a court within the Sixth Circuit, so not the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, but a federal trial court based in Kentucky, a judge just recently issued a decision on Tuesday. That's why I said, that's why we're in here again, because this stuff continues to develop on a daily, weekly basis. A judge invalidated that. Now, it's not a nationwide injunction, but a judge basically came in and said, listen, this vaccination mandate that you are imposing on federal contractors, this exceeds the ability of the government to do that to federal contractors.
It was an overreach, to put it very bluntly.
Yeah. They basically say Congress should be acting in this regard, not the executive branch. I mean, it goes back to Schoolhouse Rock and all the stuff we learned. What was it?
What's a bill?
Yeah. What's a bill on Capitol Hill?
But no dancing. Right.
But that's kind of what it all boils down to. I mean, we have this debate in our country about should I be forced to get a vaccine or should I not? A lot of these cases are really a lot more boring and procedural in nature in terms of who is supposed to be instituting these mandates. Is it Congress or the executive branch? So that's at a very high level what's going on in most of these cases.
All right, so let's bottom line it. We bottom line what was going on in the bucket with regard to private commercial companies that are only 100 plus employees. In the federal government contracts lane, then the answer is that although up until a couple of days ago, it was easy peasy, no successful challenges. There was one unsuccessful challenge in Arizona. All of a sudden, you get this one federal district court judge within the Sixth Circuit that says, within the states of the Sixth Circuit, this is going to be enjoined, and therefore that has now created a lack of clarity. But as a bottom line, as we sit here today, you're a government contracts company. You sit there and you say, okay, I am a government contracts company. I'm a little bit under 100 employees. I thought everything was cool. Then this district court judge in the Sixth Circuit did this thing. What does this mean to me? What's my bottom line right now?
Yeah. So from a very narrow standpoint, it means that if you operate in Kentucky, Ohio, and Tennessee, those are the three states that were
Affected
subject
by
to
the
this judge.
decision.
Yes.
Right.
So if you operate in those three states, if you have contracts in those three states, if you have contract employees, and keep in mind, government contractors, even when they're located here in the DMV, the DC region,
Contracts all over the country.
they can have employees working all over the place. So this is just
Customers all over the
headquarters.
place, yeah.
Yeah. So for right now, as of Tuesday's decision, it's Kentucky, Ohio, and Tennessee. It's hard for us to say. I mean, we almost have to date stamp these podcasts because who knows on Monday whether that list will expand.
So in other words, those three states, if you are conducting your business as a government contractor, unless you are performing a government contract in those three states, you are still in the clear and are still under a directive to apply the federal non-light vaccination mandate approach, where your people have to get vaccinated still, period.
Yep.
Except for the two very, very narrow exceptions of disability or religious accommodation. Is
That's
that right?
exactly right. Yep. So
Okay.
and you know, the pretty narrow states. I mean, you know, it means really it's not seismic. The reason why it's important though is these decisions are pretty voluminous when they're coming out. They're very well thought through. You can disagree with the analysis all you want, but they're not just issuing one-page orders saying we're enjoining this in these three states. They're giving roadmaps for other courts who are sympathetic to their viewpoints to do the same thing. So we can be sure that these states are going to be added to over the coming weeks.
I think that's a great point, because these judges are very conservative, and they're saying things in these decisions that are very controversial and that are very incendiary. They're saying that, and again, we're summarizing here because we're trying to keep this short, but they're summarizing and saying in a lot of these decisions that although these are federal structural constitutional issues, they're also nodding and tipping their hat to the point that there may be a personal privacy fundamental right to not have to have allegedly the government force people to get vaccinated. Now, we can have that debate all day about whether that is legally and socially a correct ruling, but I'm telling you that element of those rulings is a ticking time bomb, because it's going to feed, as you're saying, a lot more litigation, a lot more things. But let's just circle back to the basics. So you've got these cases, federal circuit courts, commercial private companies, Sixth Circuit sitting there. We'll see what happens. Federal government contractors, except those three states, it's still happening. However, is it fair to say that with these two main buckets, I think you see what's happening next. Ultimately, where are these headed?
Yeah, I mean, because I think what a lot of companies were worried about is they're looking at these deadlines, January 4th for full vaccination, and then, of course, the 2-week waiting period after you get your final shot, so January 18th. People were looking at this and saying, am I going to have to get rid of a lot of my workforce that's not willing to do this?
Right.
I personally think while they still have to continue to take, especially when you're not in those three states that are impacted by the injunction.
If you're a government contractor,
you still have to proceed, absolutely. But
completely,
you have to proceed. You have to proceed. You should be planning all this stuff. You should be communicating with your employees. In the back of my mind, though, I just keep thinking that I think it would be drastic to really start planning for sizable layoffs come January if, in fact, you still have a workforce where enough people are reluctant to get vaccinated. Yeah. I think maybe the answer is certainly not to grant exceptions, but I think perhaps looking at granting extensions, I think we're going to have more clarity anyways on some of this stuff. So
that's a great point. So in other words, if you're a government contractor, except for those three states, move ahead with the understanding that you may want to tread light on crossing that final bridge for separating anybody's employment, and if there's a way to be able to elongate, to prolong that, or to maybe apply a little bit more of a liberal application of the disability and religious accommodation exceptions.
Yeah,
that's trickier.
That's a tough one because you create precedents within a company that you might be stuck with a few years from now.
True. Yeah. Although then again, that highlights how incredibly difficult this is for the business managers and the CEOs, and frankly for the employees too. This is a complete debacle. It's very, very unclear, and frankly, absent this kind of a conversation, I can understand how 90% of business leaders and employees in the country will be like, "What the hell's going on?" Because it's really hard to keep this straight. Now, we've created two buckets, and we've said that they're starting now, and they're probably headed to the Supreme Court shortly, and then you and I can bicker about what does shortly mean.
Yeah.
Just when we thought that we kind of laid out and set the table, there's a third and final bucket, which I will call the smaller bucket, because I still think that it is tangential, but it is not irrelevant. Help me understand, what is that third bucket and what's going on with that?
So this was another development on Tuesday. I believe it was issued on this Tuesday of this past week, so November 30th. So just since people might be watching this later on.
Right.
So what happened was you've got healthcare workers also. Healthcare workers were obviously on the front lines of everything. So their vaccination mandates came out quite a bit earlier than what we're talking about government contractors.
Separately in a separate pipe. Because now we're talking about the healthcare industry.
That's exactly right. And the federal government used its power under Medicare and Medicaid because federal government always has to reach healthcare workers that are getting those type of dollars. Those are federal dollars.
Right.
And basically what they said is if you're a healthcare worker that deals in any way with Medicare or Medicaid, those are two federal programs obviously, and let's face it, I mean, most healthcare workers are dealing in some way, shape, or form with Medicare or Medicaid.
Sure.
There are 10 million of them, and 2.5 million are still not vaccinated. So there's a sizable number. And so there was an all-out mandate for vaccination. The thought behind it is you're dealing with patients, at least a lot of them. You're dealing with the patients, so therefore you have direct contact. These patients are usually in a less than well condition. So we're asking that you get vaccinated, and that was an all-out requirement.
And that stood for a while because there were some challenges, including some legal challenges by people and nurses and so forth. Those initially failed, and it looks like, similar to the government contracts thing, that was a clean slate. It was full go. It was a simple situation.
Yes.
And then what happened?
And then a judge in Louisiana, a federal judge in Louisiana. So now that's in the Fifth Circuit. This is like we're going between the Fifth and the Sixth Circuit, going back, ping pong, back and forth. But a judge in Louisiana on Tuesday issued a nationwide. So these federal judges have discretion on how far they want their injunctions to go. We talked about federal contractors. That particular judge said it's only going to be 3 states. It's not going to be the full nation.
Right. Now we're talking about the healthcare
But
industry.
now in the healthcare industry, the Louisiana federal judge says we are issuing an absolute injunction against enforcement of this vaccination requirement for healthcare workers,
which is amazing.
And it's nationwide.
Yeah.
And actually, this is probably the most. I choose my words carefully here. I don't want to get on the wrong side of a Louisiana federal judge. But this was probably the most aggressive of all the decisions that I've seen.
Why
really,
is that?
What it did was it adopted a lot of what its appellate court, which is the Fifth Circuit, found. Yeah. But it really went through and showed its true. The judge definitely showed its true view of what the judge thought about this mandate. And in fact, in one point said, look, I believe, and it was in a footnote, but it basically in sum and substance says, look, the purpose is really, let's stop talking about workplace safety because that's a little bit of a smokescreen. The real purpose of the administration here is to ramp up vaccinations across the country. And they're doing so in a way where they can do it through Medicare and Medicaid.
Pull out a sledgehammer and just beat people into submission according to the legal theory. I'm not saying that's our theory. That's the arguments in the case.
That's how they viewed it. So that's yet another one where it's invalidated. I mean, there is a trend of a lot of these vaccine mandates being invalidated. Now, it's very hodgepodge. It's very much so far located in the Fifth and Sixth Circuits. But
of all the 3 buckets we've been talking about thus far.
Yes.
But conservative jurisdictions.
Yes, very conservative jurisdictions. It's going to make its way up to the Supreme Court.
Okay, so now let's zoom out. We have these 3 buckets, the 2 main ones, and the third ancillary but not unimportant venue talking about the healthcare industry. I think that we both agree that these suckers are headed to the Supreme Court. It's not a question of if, but a question of when. And I think we both agree that at some point, roughly within the first half of next year, it's gradually going to make its way up to the Supreme Court. So then I guess you can see my next question coming all the way down the highway. How does this thing end? Because I think the Supreme Court will, first of all, have to in some way consolidate this entire mess, because it realizes that you have all of these ping pongs that are fluttering around in a very inconsistent and confusing hot mess. And I think they're going to bring it all together before their July 1 break and and hopefully create some kind of resolution and clarity. Do you think procedurally that's going to happen? And do you think substantively whether the big picture on this, whether the regs are going to survive or die?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it's how you look at what the role of the Supreme Court is. You could look at the role of the Supreme Court and say, you know what, they need to bring clarity to this. They need to help employers across the board, whether they're federal contractors, whether they're 100-plus employees, whether they're healthcare workers. We need to bring some clarity to them because it's hurting our economy,
and for the
and we
nation.
just don't know. Yeah, but guess what? That's not the role of the Supreme Court. And in fact, we have many justices on there who believe that the role of the Supreme Court, rightly or wrongly, is to really look at how the system went through. So they're very process oriented. So they're going to be scouring this to see, did Congress give enough power and authorization? It's going to be like the most unsexy arguments, because it's not going to be about vaccinations. It's not going to be about workplace safety. It's going to be about, the Administrative Procedures Act. It's going to put people to sleep. But this is what the Supreme Court's going to do. So I have to tell you, Seth, I don't believe when it gets up to the Supreme Court that we're going to wrap it all up in a bow and know one way or another whether or not workplaces have to follow these vax mandates or not. I believe it's going to still be hodgepodge because each one of these mandates is coming down from a separate government agency. You got OMB for federal contractors, you got OSHA for the 100-plus employee, and you got CMS, which is the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, for healthcare workers. And each one of them has a different mandate. Each one of them got different authorizing statutory language,
underlying regulations.
Yeah, so I just have to be honest that I don't think that the Supreme Court is the avenue where this is all going to take place.
Although I tend to disagree on that, and I believe that the Supreme Court, through the leadership of the Chief Justice, Justice Roberts, because he tends to try to be kind of the arbiter in the middle.
He builds consensus.
He builds consensus, and I think that he's very reluctant to trash major things. See, for example, Obamacare. I believe that there will be at least an attempt to try to bring a global resolution to everything by the middle of the summer. But the thing that you're pointing out, which is a very good point, is that there are a lot of procedural exits for them to punt. So, for example, they could say different rules, different regs, different road. Sorry, guys, we're going to have to split these and keep them as 3 separate buckets. They could also say, hey, let's talk about something called the 10th Amendment. Let the states deal with it. We're going to invalidate this nationally and let the states deal with this whole thing. I don't think that's going to happen. But I think
we might have to put a friendly bet on this. Your favorite? What's your favorite bottle of tequila right now?
Well, you'll meet me down at American Prime and we can have that debate.
Man, that's like a sponsorship now. I mean, we need to get. We ought to be getting at least a.
Jenny better give me a free round. That's all I'm going to say. But in terms of wrapping this up, and I know that we have to wrap it up. If you were going to give one piece of advice, and I'm going to try to end on a very specific note, if you're going to give one piece of advice to business leaders in the Washington, D.C. area for the federal government contract space, for HR directors and CEOs, what's that one piece of advice and how to unravel this whole mess?
Yeah, I would say 2 words. Be ready. Don't sit on your hands right now. If you don't already know the vaccination makeup of your workforce, I mean, one, shame on you. You ought to know that by now because this stuff is all just happening this past week.
Right.
Know the vaccination makeup of your workplace because you know what? You might find at the end of the day you're pleasantly surprised that it's not really a big issue. You've got a handful of people. You can deal with that through some flexibility. I would start to put together written policies because a lot of these mandates also require written policies. You're not going to send them out to your workforce because they're probably going to change by the time a lot of this legal wrangling is over with.
But at least you have clarity, you have process, you have objectivity, you have a way. Exactly.
Federal contractors, of course, are the ones that are outside of those 3 states that really just need to continue on and look very closely at that January 4th deadline for their people to get vaccinated. So, most of you got to move forward. board on a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
If you have 100+ employees, I would do the stuff about ascertaining vaccination and getting written policies in order.
My conclusion is if you're leadership in the government contract space here in the DC metro area, keep going, but stay connected. See what's happening. Keep an eye on things, stay connected to your employees, keep the communication channels open. But right now, for the most part, nothing has changed in the government contract space, for the most part. But beware, be careful, and just keep an eye out, because this is a very incendiary. It can change at any time, and states can go in and throw their own wrench into it. Florida has their own rules that say you can't do any of this. That's a separate headache for another day. But right now, just continue marching forward and keep an open eye and ear. Thanks, Declan. You did a great job unraveling the whole hot mess. And, we'll see what happens next week.
No, it's good discussion, Seth. Thanks.
Thanks.